In this video, I will be talking about the life of Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, the wife of the founding father Alexander Hamilton. Elizabeth was born on August 9th, 1757 in Albany, New York. She had 14 siblings: Angelica, Margarita, Carmela, John, another John, Philip, Rensselaer, Cornelius, another Cornelius, Cordent, and Catherine. She was born into a very wealthy family. Her father, Philip Schuyler, was a war hero who was fighting for the Patriots during the Revolutionary War. He, like many landowners at the time, owned slaves. Therefore, Elizabeth grew up around slavery and had grown to dislike it. Eventually, after her husband's death, she would speak out against slavery. She met her husband, Alexander Hamilton, in 1780. Elizabeth went to go stay with her aunt, Gertrude Schuyler Cochran, in Morristown, New Jersey. While she was staying there, she met Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was stationed along with General George Washington and his men in Morristown. They had already met previously when Hamilton was coming back from delivering a letter to Washington. Although in Morristown, Elizabeth met Martha Washington, General George Washington's wife. They quickly became friends and stayed friends until their death. Elizabeth later quoted that she was always my ideal of a true woman. Hamilton later left Morristown to negotiate a prisoner's exchange. While he was away, the two continued writing letters to each other, progressing in their relationship. He then returned to Morristown and they got engaged in April. After their honeymoon at Elizabeth's childhood home, they returned to the Schuyler mansion. After that, Elizabeth moved back to her parents' house in Albany. At the time, she was pregnant with her first child. He would be named Philip after her father. British soldiers attempted to raid her house, but her sister Margarita, or Peggy Schuyler, made them go away by saying her father was in the village. During the timeline of 1784 and 1786, Elizabeth gave birth to 3 children: Angelica, Alexander, and James Alexander. When her husband was writing the Federalist Papers, making America's bank, and helping the government, Elizabeth helped out at home while taking care of her now 5 children. On November 24th, 1794, Elizabeth suffered a miscarriage when she was pregnant with her 6th child. In 1797, Alexander Hamilton had an affair with Maria Reynolds, with the knowing consent of James Reynolds, Maria's husband. The deal was if that Alexander paid James, he wouldn't tell anybody. On August 25th, Hamilton wrote a pamphlet, the Reynolds pamphlet, explaining the affair that had been going on for 1 year now. At this time that this was happening, Elizabeth was pregnant with her 6th child. When she first learned about the pamphlet and the affair, Elizabeth fled Alexander in New York and joined her parents in Albany once again. She stayed there until her first son, Philip, tragically died in a duel between himself and a man called George Eaker. Elizabeth suddenly returned to New York to attend Philip's funeral. Elizabeth forgave Alexander for the affair out of grief because of her son's death. Their last child was born in 1802, and they named it Philip after their first son. 2 years later, Elizabeth's husband died due to the infamous Hamilton-Burr duel. After her husband's death, Elizabeth was forced to pay off her husband's debts. The house that John Macomb Jr. built them in 1802 was sold by Elizabeth at a public auction. Eventually, she was able to buy it back. In 1833, Elizabeth was then 76. She sold the house again for $25,000. She used that money to buy a new house in New York, where she lived for 9 years. For the rest of her life, Elizabeth worked to defend her husband's story. Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton died at 97, 1854. There is now a musical called Hamilton about Alexander and Elizabeth's life. It is available on Disney+.